Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's lecture in economics. Today we will be answering the essential question, what is a command economy? And as part of that essential question, we will be answering the following questions as well. How is a planned economy organized? How did the economy of the former Soviet Union operate, because it was representative of a command economy? And what are the problems and challenges of a centrally planned economy? As long as you have the essential question written across the top, we are ready to rock and roll. So let's first discuss what a planned economy is. A planned economy is an economy where the government or a central authority owns the factors of production and makes the basic economic decisions. So think in terms of the government owning the resources, think in terms of the government owning the factories, and in many cases, think of the government owning the stores where everything is sold. Very different from the United States. In this case, government usually controls important parts of the economy, such as transportation, communications, banking, agriculture, and manufacturing. So, in societies and countries that have a command economy, the government has much more control and influence than we are used to in the United States. Government might also set wages and decide where you work. So you might not have a choice where you work, and you might not have a choice or the ability to compete for what you're going to get paid. You wouldn't be able to apply to multiple companies and say, I'll work for the company that offers me the best job. It would just be, you take the job you're given. So, examples of countries that have command economies would be ancient Egypt, the former USSR, which we called the Soviet Union. You know it as Russia today, plus the former Soviet republics. Communist China, although I would argue strongly that today China does not operate by a pure command economy, but when China first became communist in 1949, it absolutely did. Cuba under Fidel Castro and today's Venezuela are examples of planned economies. Please focus on the things in bold as you are taking notes. How are decisions made in a planned economy? In a free market economy, decisions are made by the law of supply and demand. In a planned economy, as you might guess, it is planned in advance. At least the attempt is made to plan it in advance. A central planning group makes most of the production decisions in a command economy. In communist countries, they were famously known for their 5-year plans. They would literally try to plan out ahead of time, 5 years ahead of time, without knowing what was going to happen in the world, what was going to happen in their economy. The result is that only those products that the government chooses will be available for people to consume. So the government would decide what is made and what is not made and how much of that thing are made. And if the government guessed incorrectly, guess what? Issues ensued. What gets produced depends on the goals and values of those in power. So whoever was making the plan, whatever their goals were, whatever their values were, determined what was made. So this is exactly the opposite of the law of supply and demand. A perfect example of this was China choosing steel over farming and food. So when China became a communist country, Mao Zedong, its leader, made the decision, we are going to industrialize. We are going to focus on becoming a country that makes things rather than growing things. Cuba, when it became communist, chose to plant sugar over having a robust banking and business industry. Those were decisions made by the government. What are command economies based on and how do they operate? The basis of command economies basically starts with central planning. That's where the word command comes from. And these are things that centrally planned economies oppose and or try to avoid. Private property, something we take for granted in the United States. Under a command economy, citizens do not necessarily have a right to own their property. Free market pricing. Prices do not go up or down based on the law of supply and demand or scarcity. Prices are determined by the government, period. Competition. You might not have McDonald's and Five Guys and Carl's Jr. and Burger King. You might just have hamburger store number 1, and that's where you'll get your hamburger. Consumer choice. If you only have hamburger store number 1 and you want a hamburger, guess where you're going? Guess well. The central government, rather than the individual makers of things and buyers of things in the markets, answers the key economic questions of production and consumption. So, the thinking and the planning are done for you. You simply follow along and say thank you. How do they operate in reality? A central bureaucracy, so basically government workers, makes all the decisions. They decide what to make, how to make it, who gets it, and it's up to those government workers to ensure that everyone has enough raw materials and workers to meet their production goals. So if they're going to decide what's made, they have to get the stuff that it's made from, and they have to have enough people to make it. And that's all decided by the government. Again, very different than the United States. Here's something to think about. What if the government seized Apple and eliminated all of its competitors? We'll press pause on the video and discuss. No more Android. What are socialism and communism? This is a personal thing for me. I really, really dislike it when people don't understand the difference between socialism and communism, because in the United States, these words get thrown around as though they mean the same thing, and there are very important differences. So please pay attention to this slide, because this slide will help you to get smarter. Socialism is a social and economic philosophy based on the belief that democratic means should be used to distribute wealth evenly throughout a society. Notice democratic means, meaning the people get to decide, the people have a voice and a say, and the goal is to distribute wealth evenly throughout a society. Real equality is when political and economic quality are brought together. If you have an authoritarian government that's trying to create economic equality, the people really don't have a voice. Socialism requires a high degree of central planning to achieve economic equality, not a true democracy, though it might allow for some democratic principles. So socialism, even though it does value democratic principles, still requires central planning, and that's why it is under the aegis or the title of a command economy. The government owns major industries. So, for example, instead of having PGE, you would have the government electric company, which there are some places that actually do have public utilities, but in this case, or think of the healthcare industry. Socialized medicine is when the government owns the hospitals and pays the doctors. And many countries do have that. Great Britain is a perfect example. Communism is a political system that arose out of socialism. It's a lot more authoritarian in nature. So communism is more extreme than socialism and deprives people of their individual rights more aggressively. Communism is characterized by a centrally planned economy with all economic and political power resting in the central government. So they don't hold elections, they simply tell you what's up. The government owns everything, including where you live. So in a communist country, you might not see homelessness, but what you would see is everyone living in very drab public apartments and not a lot of neighborhoods where people own homes. So if you go to a lot of former Soviet countries, you'll see lots of large apartment blocks. And before someone says anything, I did notice that I misspelled communism, so you don't have to point that out. Here's some food for thought. What if the government owned your house? Who would clean it? Could you remodel it? Could you repair it? Lots of things to think about. When you own your own house, you're responsible for those things, but you also get to make those decisions for yourself and what you want it to look like. In a communist government, not so much. What do communists believe? Now, these are true communists. The Chinese still call themselves communists. In terms of the way their economy runs, much more of a mixed economy. And you have to differentiate between the political system and the economic system. North Korea is much more of a pure communist country. Communists believe that socialism can only come about through violent revolution. So they're about taking everything over, kicking out the owners, and running it in the name of the people. An authoritarian government, and this word is in the news quite a bit these days, it requires strict obedience to an authority, usually a dictator, a military leader, a strong man. In Spanish, I believe the word is cabildo. Cabildo. Communist nations in history have always been dominated by a central authority, which is either a political party or dictator. So in China, it's the Chinese Communist Party, which is currently headed by Xi Jinping. Under the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin was the most famous dictator of the Soviet Union. In North Korea, that would be Kim Jong-un. And Cuba, since Cuba's on this list, we'll throw Cuba in there. Fidel Castro was the famous strongman in Cuba. Actually, for the first time, Cuba has someone other than a Castro in charge right now. I love my food for thought. What if the government came to seize your house or property tomorrow and said, "We are seizing this property in the name of the people, but we'll make sure you have some place to live, somewhere, maybe." Yeah. What are the challenges of command economies? If you live in a command economy, what kind of challenges are you going to deal with? First of all, the stuff you get is not going to be high quality, because one thing competition allows for is improved quality of the things you buy. If someone sells something that's lower quality and you want something that's higher quality, you can make that choice. In a command economy, you cannot. If the government plans poorly, there are shortages of things that people might want, but the government didn't see it coming, so the government didn't plan for those things to be made. Or production might go down if more of something is made than is needed. Systems cannot meet the needs or wants of consumers. You can't know 5 years ahead of time what people are going to want. Society ebbs and flows and changes. Technology ebbs and flows and changes. Free market economies flow with that. Command economies, not necessarily. Government owns all the factors of production. And so if you work there, you don't have the incentive to work hard. You're not going to get paid more if you work hard. You're not going to get better benefits. You're not going to get more vacation. So you have no incentive to work harder because there's no promise that your life's going to get better in any way. You just do what you're told and say thank you. So a system like this does not reward innovation. There is no entrepreneurial instinct, if you remember that word from our previous assignment. So it actively discourages any kind of change or innovation or new way of doing things. And the large bureaucracy, all the government workers necessary to run a centrally planned system, cannot react to consumer demands. It's too slow, it's too large, and there's too much regulation. Remember, regulation is one of the ways government can influence the economy. That came from a previous lecture. Also, to run an economy like this, there's a restriction on individual freedom, because in a communist system, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. You get 2 points if you know where that quote came from. So, here's a question. Do you prefer to eat our high-quality Sodexo food here at McKay, or would you rather go to a restaurant? Why? Discuss. That, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, is today's lecture on command economies. Coming soon to a classroom near you, we will discuss what a mixed economy is. And I'll give you a clue, it has nothing to do with a mixtape.